Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Thanks for coming to our session. My name is Brian Lance. I'm the technical lead for the team that my colleague and I are on. It's the Office of Vice Provost of Teaching and Learning at UC Irvine. And I'll let my colleague introduce himself.
I'm Mike Walton. I'm an application developer for the Office of Vice Provost of Teaching and Learning, IT.
OVPTL, IT. Today we're going to talk to you about the third option in build versus buy that we discovered while we were bringing enterprise appointment scheduling solution to our campus. We'll talk about, give you some background on why we're doing this, some of the research that we went through, our initial efforts to build something, and then the discovery of our third option, and then kind of going through the implementation process of that, and then the lessons learned. So a little bit of background. Our team, we support undergraduate advising offices on campus. There's, I don't know, 12 to 15, depending on how you count them. And they all have common advising appointment scheduling needs. And early on at UC Irvine, IT was decentralized, and so that meant that individual groups kind of were on their own many times for how they would do things, including scheduling appointments. So some of the things that people would do is use Exchange or other calendaring solutions that were available on campus to schedule appointments, track things in spreadsheets, use third-party tools such as UCTech, and then one of our in-house built systems for the undergraduate undeclared office includes a pretty robust scheduling component to it that a lot of other advising offices on campus were interested in and asked us for, but we couldn't provide to them for various reasons. The Exchange and the spreadsheet solutions would involve a lot of email, back and forth, phone calls, maybe people having to physically visit an office to schedule an appointment. In 2014, the governance board that would help our group decide what large projects to work on tasked us with finding a solution for the appointment scheduling needs of the groups that we support. So we began by doing some research on what our options are. This involved many department interviews to gather requirements, see what people are doing now. And from that, we distilled a very long list of requirements and features that would need to be part of a system. Staff want to be able to designate when students could sign up for appointments. Students need to be able to do self-service to schedule appointments, cancel appointments. They want the system to be able to send confirmation emails for anything related to the appointment. Reminder emails as well. They need to meet data security and privacy requirements of the university to be compatible with our single sign-on solution, and various other things. I'm not going to go through all these, but this is just a small subset of what they wanted. And here you can see a longer list. There's actually like 2 more pages of things that our clients wanted. So these are some of the different systems that we evaluated during our research. And there's our in-house system and other systems there as well. So some of those were things that we could have purchased, and some of those had the potential to meet nearly all requirements. So some of the ones that we looked at that you might have seen on there were You Can Book Me, the paid version, the E2E appointment manager, and Schedule Once. These solutions tended to be expensive with annual prices, initial setup charges, and if you wanted to do any customizations, there were steep hourly charges. There were also concerns about data ownership and accessibility of the data to be able to integrate back into UC Irvine. So the decision was made to actually build something in-house for our campus that we could build from the ground up, make sure that we're meeting all the needs of our clients. So our initial efforts started in early 2015 with planning and design, and then development started in April 2015. A few months into the project, we ran into some roadblocks. We had many competing priorities, so we weren't able to dedicate all the time that we needed to on this. We're a Scrum team, and it was one of our first big projects that we were working on in that environment. So we're still trying to figure out the Scrum, the Agile, all that, and how that works. And to add on top of that, our lead developer for our team left in June of 2015. So that slowed us down even more. However, along the way, if we step back just a little bit to February of 2015, I was on vacation. Actually, I mentioned that to this gentleman here earlier, visiting a friend that works at UC Davis, and we're just talking about work and what we're working on, and she mentioned that UC Davis has this great appointment scheduling system. And so I came back from my vacation, talked to my team, and we were already working on this other thing, so we decided to continue with that. Oh yeah, so the third option is to borrow from another campus. So back to the summer of 2015, when our former lead developer left for our team, we decided to go back and take a look at what was available to us, including UC Davis's system. First thing we did was schedule a demo, and through that demo, we learned more about it and that it was a mature product. It could potentially meet all of the requirements that our clients needed. And it was already using the same tech stack that we were using. We're a .NET shop, so C#, ASP.NET, SQL Server, all that. So our next step was to try and get our hands on the code. And fortunately, we were able to do that in summer and take a look at the code to make sure that it was something that was actually viable, that we would want to work with, be able to work on our team. However, there were some concerns about exactly what this code sharing would look like, from who's responsible for what, how things were going to work. And so there was about a 3 to 4 month process of establishing a memorandum of understanding with UC Davis that spelled all those out. So the basics of that is that Davis was going to give us the code. We were responsible for making any changes that we needed to. We could share things back, but there was no get a word right now. Basically, we were on our own to do what we needed to with the code, as long as we attributed to them that they were the original developers of this application. So once the MOU was established, we began the implementation at our campus. First thing we ran into was some of the technical challenges of just how we're different at our campuses and how our data is organized, and how things work. And we still had other competing priorities. We weren't able to necessarily dedicate all the time that we needed to, again, on this system. So we were able to hire a temporary employee to come work for us that was focused on the appointment system. It was a 6-month contract that their main goal was to get the system stood up at UC Irvine so that we could do a pilot with our customers to see if it was something that would actually work for them. So their focus was, just get it done, get it working, not necessarily doing it exactly the right way. And so we did establish a pilot. The pilot process, it was 6 months. It was over 6 months, from June to November of 2017. So we had about a year between when we got the code to when, actually about a year and a half from when we got the code to when our pilot started. And some of that was because we didn't have time to work on it. We had 3 participants in our pilot, 3 different departments at UC Irvine. They each had a 3-month pilot that were staggered starts. During the pilots, we did an assessment in the middle and at the end where we surveyed them, got their feedback about what was working, what wasn't working for them. And the overall outcome, they were happy with it. They thought it was something that could work for them. And all of them are actually still using the system today. However, we did learn there were many things that we need to fix, which gets us into phase 2 of our process. And once we decided that we were going to continue beyond the pilot, we needed another dedicated resource to actually fix the issues that we found. So we hired Mike. And I'm going to let Mike talk now about the phase 2 process of our system.
Yep, so as Brian said, the pilot was successful. We have 3 offices using this system. I was brought on in February of 2018 with the idea that I would spend my first year of employment at the university working on this phase 2 of appointment. So here were our goals for the phase 2. There were some significant performance issues. One of the big pages that you need to use the system was loading up all of this data to render it on a calendar, and it was painfully slow for some of our users. There were also some bugs that needed fixes. And then the other big one was this campus-wide rollout. So the system started off, it was only available for students to make appointments with these academic offices on campus. We eventually wanted to roll it out to all users, not just students. So staff, faculty, other people who might want to make appointments with various offices. And the other big one was making appointments more agnostic about the structure of UCI data. Our data lives in all kinds of databases, and its schema is what it is. And there was talk that we were going to be going to a student data warehouse that was going to change the schema of our UCI data and appointments. As you'll see from some diagrams, that was going to require a lot of refactoring in appointments. So there were also some known technical issues. The database changes were untracked. Database just lived where it lived. There was a lot of DB crosstalk, so stored procedures in the appointment system that were calling out to other databases on our UCI databases to get student data. Inconsistency in use of user IDs, which I'll go into in another slide, and the performance issues that I talked about. So the first thing I did when I took over the project was to take a look at how to manage these database changes, because this is a 12-year-old application. It's like a WinForms application, which meant that, in that style of developing, a lot of the business logic was sitting in stored procedures. With Entity Framework and things like that, you don't really build things like that anymore. That was kind of how this project worked. So the problem with much of the logic being in stored procedures is if we're not tracking the database changes in source control, we're really going to start to lose track of things. It also means that we had a manual deployment process, which meant that our database environments, stage, dev, and production, were frequently out of sync because those database changes were not applied consistently every time. So the solution was to create an automated build and deploy process using our continuous integration tool, Jenkins, and to script out all of the database objects and create a process to run the database update on when we deploy to stage of production. So what that did was it helped us keep all of our databases in sync. It allowed us to track and roll back database changes as we were making changes to the system. And it just made everything we did going forward much faster and much more reliable. So the second set of issues, which were a little bigger, were this issue with the student IDs, the performance, and the database crosstalk. So for the IDs, I don't know what it looks like on other campuses, but on our campus, we have a lot of different IDs. Some IDs only students have, some IDs only staff has. Some IDs get recycled. If I'm MJ Walton today, somebody else might be MJ Walton in a couple of years. Some IDs are for internal use only. So our most reliable ID for tracking users in our system is the campus ID. Nobody knows their campus ID. It is something that is for internal use only. So, and there were different parts of the appointments application that were tracking users by different IDs. So the table that tracks who has what appointment was using one ID, and the table that tracks who has permission to make an appointment with this calendar uses a completely different ID. So you'd have to go out to some other database to do a lookup to figure out who was who across these databases. The other issue was this performance and the database crosstalk. So all of these calls to other UCI databases being done inline in stored procedures. This is where some of our performance issues were coming from. And it prevented us from using different connection strings for different DBs. So we were working in the dev environment. That meant we were working in the dev environment, whether we were looking at student data, we were looking at appointment-specific data. In some of our other tools, we might have a dev environment that pulls student data from the production environment because we're not writing to that, so there's no real harm in using production data. But we didn't have the ability to do that because we were locked into a single connection string for all of our database stuff. And it was difficult to maintain if the database structure changes. And these next set of slides will kind of illustrate what was going on here better than my words. So this was the old appointment system. This is the application layer. This is the appointments database. And this is the appointments database calling out to our various systems that hold student, faculty, grade, all of that data. So it was the appointments database that was talking directly to all of these sources. To get another view of this database dependencies, these are our UCI data sources, and this up here represents the appointments database, and all of these lines represent foreign keys. So, you know, this table has a foreign key down here into these databases. So you can see how intertwined the appointments data was with our UCI data. This is what I lived with for probably 8 months or something. These are all the stored procedures. Each of these rectangles represents a stored procedure in the appointments database. And then these are our UCI data sources that these stored procedures access. So you can see how much access was going out to our local databases. If we decided to change the schema for these databases, all of this stuff had to be refactored. So this is a huge undertaking. So what did we do? Well, the first thing we did was we encapsulated the UCI data retrieval logic into a data provider project. So I have a graphic that'll show that, but basically, if everything goes through a data provider, we can write an interface for that data provider, and then if the schema for our UCI data changes, we just re-implement that one data provider, and the rest should just work, rather than having to go in and modify all of those stored procedures in that diagram. So that's what this is, can be swapped out with a new implementation. And then each database can use its own connection string, which was a nice bonus. For the IDs, we decided to use a consistent ID for tracking all users in all places in the application. So that campus ID I talked about, that's how we're tracking people in the appointments system now, in all places. If we need to match that up with some other ID, well, for whatever reason, somebody logs in and uses their login ID, that's when we'll go out and look it up. But in terms of the internal databases and appointments, that means we always know the guy in this table is the guy in this table. We don't have to go out to another database to look it up. And then the other thing to tackle the appointments, because so much of this logic was buried in stored procedures, there were a lot of cases where they were just grabbing everything, even though they didn't need it. And so I looked for opportunities to implement some lazy loads so that we weren't pulling back as much data, and that sped up some of the slower pages. So this is what the new appointments architecture looks like. You can see here's still our application layer. Appointments has its own database, but to talk to all of our UCI data sources, we're going through this layer, this UCI, this DUE data access, which implements an interface. So that means if that changes, we can just re-implement that interface. So what were our results? We eliminated all the database crosstalk. So now we're in a position where we can totally change that data, the data schema of UCI data, and it won't be an issue for appointments. The performance was improved significantly. We got a lot of feedback on that. And the campus-wide rollout was successful by using this ID that everybody has. It's not going to change. we can support staff, we can support faculty, we can support students who haven't matriculated yet. We can support a lot of, I don't know if we can support non-matriculated students, maybe.
They can log in.
Yeah, so yeah, if they can log in.
They can log in.
So yeah, so we were able to support a lot more stuff. And then with the changes to the build process, we improved the build and deployment process for quicker and more reliable releases. We recently hired, the year that I was supposed to spend working on this is over. I'm working on other things now. We recently hired a student employee. And because our build and deployment processes are so robust, he was able to just start working right away. He didn't have to learn anything complicated. And we're not in danger of having things go out of sync, even though it's a student, the process kind of does all that for us. So what are our lessons learned? And these are more of the technical lessons learned, because I worked on more of the technical side. So the first one is treat these projects, even if they're something that you got from another organization, treat them like you would treat in-house projects. Document them like you would document in-house projects. Share knowledge, don't silo the knowledge. When we hired the contractor who worked on nothing but appointments, when that guy was gone, you know, there was no resource for continuing to work on appointments. So now we've got good documentation, and we're not siloing the knowledge as much. Create a robust build and deploy early, like you would do for any application, because that will speed up all of the development and deploy cycles. And be thoughtful about how you choose to connect your data to the appointment, to the application's data. So as Brian said, for the pilot, we just needed to get it working. And so we implemented it very similar to the way Davis had it implemented. But when we took a second look and we're a little more thoughtful about how we were tying appointments application data into our, our special UCI student data, that meant that we could do a lot more. That meant that our system was a little more reliable and easier to work with. So that's figure out which IDs make sense and encapsulate the logic that pulls from your specific data sources in a provider that another institution could implement. And this is something that we learned by implementing UC Davis's solution that we can take as we build our solutions on the off chance that we might want to share those with other campuses, because a lot of campuses have the same use cases that we have. We're all working with students, student data. So when writing some code that could potentially be shared with other institutions, here's some things to be thoughtful about. The big one, the separation between application data and institution-specific data that might be organized differently in other organizations. Try to put that in its own place so somebody else can just re-implement your solution. You don't have to take the whole application apart. Performance aspects. I think UC Davis probably doesn't have quite as many students as we do, so and they may have had a faster data access for their student data, but once we hooked it up to our system, it was really slow. So be thoughtful about the fact that other institutions might not have the same performance with retrieving data, and maybe use lazy loads and things like that where you can. And project organization. Can the database be scripted and included with the source? And dependencies that vary by institutions, they should be easy to swap out. The kind of the theme of what I've been saying. So those are our lessons learned. Brian?
Yeah, I would actually have one more lesson learned. I didn't actually get into the slides, but early on in the presentation, I had the picture of all the systems that we looked at early on before we made our decision. UC Davis was listed. I don't know if anybody saw it, but it had a bunch of question marks. We didn't actually, I don't think we had heard about it. We maybe had a few questions answered, but we didn't do a deep dive into actually what it was and what was available to us. So I would say, the other lesson is actually to fully do your due diligence, if you're evaluating systems that may be available to you. So for acknowledgements, we were very appreciative of the team at UC Davis and the Student Affairs Office of Technology, Megan Richmond and Elias Lopez, which I don't think either one of them are part of that team. The team actually maybe dissolved like about a year ago. And Davis is going through some transitions with their advising appointment scheduling system at their campus. And then at UC Irvine, the Office of Vice Provost of Teaching and Learning, trusting us in being able to deliver something to our campus. And then also, it's not up there, but the Office of Information Technology that we work for and management there.
Also, some metrics, right, on who's using appointments now.
Yeah. So the pilot, we had 3 participants, 3 units. I don't know exactly how many users, how many appointments they did, but currently, as of this morning, we have about 15 offices on campus that. Some of those aren't offices that we traditionally supported on our team. That they're using appointments, about 120 staff users. And over the last 2 years, they've scheduled about 17,000 appointments with 8,000 unique clients, so students or other people on campus. Question?
I assume there was a cost.
There was no. We did not have to give them any money. They gave us the code.
Nice. We're doing something with UC instead of the EAOP.
With what system?
The EAOP education system. Not an opportunity program where the counselors are out in high schools.
Okay. Great. Yeah.
But it's not.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. So we did. As part of the MOU, we talked to them, and one of the things that came up was maybe they, would host it for us, and they weren't interested in doing it. So that might have had a cost, but since they were giving us the code,
Right.
we were doing the development.
They're hosting it. So
Yeah.
that's
How would you quantify the investment you made in this effort versus like built from scratch from 5?
So this system is about 12 years old. When we were doing our development, we estimated for our MVP it would probably take 3 to 4 months, and we got 3 to 4 months in development. We didn't really have anything, so I'm not. I'm not sure how to answer your question. What, David?
One follow-up.
David is also from Irvine, and he was involved in.
It was, so in their presentation, they talked about 1 year of a temporary developer and then 6 months of a second developer, which was Mike. So that's about 18 months of development, and it caught them up to 12 years of code. So when in the time of development, it was pretty massive, because you think about a history of this application going through an iterative process over the course of 12 years, adding a different feature after feature, and then them spending about 18 months to get to that point was huge.
The features of this application, you think about, I'll tell colleagues of mine who work in tech in the private sector, and I'll say, I work on this thing to help people book appointments, and everybody's like, you mean Outlook? Nobody really understands, but this is an incredibly complicated piece of software. It controls access lists, availability. There are all kinds of rules about what availability to show for which office and things like that. It's an incredibly complicated piece of software.
Yeah, one of the requirements I think I skipped over on the screen was the ability of staff to limit who can sign up for certain appointment slots, and that was something this did already. So we didn't have to, which probably take a little time. Yeah.
Any thoughts about putting this back into the repository so that Davis and maybe other Cs could, you put a tremendous amount of work into it. I would imagine Davis must be suffering some of the same pain points that you guys experience.
My understanding is that Davis is actually looking to replace this at this point. I'm not entirely sure why.
Maybe you should sign an MOU.
Yeah, we need to look at our MOU. We have had since the schedule for this went live, a couple months ago. We have had some interest from other campuses. So yeah, that's something that we could potentially do with our MOU and everything else.
I just see an opportunity. There are things UC-wide like the site farm distribution other projects like that where things could be
Yeah,
converted back into possible.
yeah, I think it would be great if there was something UC-wide where we could put things like this, and even some of our other projects we work on, that they're not unique, like Mike said.
Yeah, we took a lot of the lessons that we learned from this effort. We're building a thing to manage tutorials right now, and we built a data provider class that provides all the UCI data, kind of as one of the lessons learned from this, so that if we ever want to share that with other universities, it'd be easier for them to take the code.
What was the working relationship like during this setup with Davis? Because I imagine they have full-time jobs, but they're trying to support you guys indirectly, pay or.
Yeah, so that's kind of spelled out in the MOU, like what kind of what their responsibility is for that. They were we had to get everything set up on our site on our own. They were available to consult with us if we had questions, about what what was needed, and we talked to them a lot, questions. Yeah, very, very appreciative of all the support they provided us.
If you had to do it all over again, with all the lessons learned, would you still go that path or versus the build revive?
I don't know. I think we might still go with borrow, but with everything that we learned along the way with this, maybe that initial work that we did, we may have done that differently.
Or even ask different questions as we're evaluating a piece of software to borrow.
Any other questions? Thank you. Thanks, everybody.